Welcome to Philosophy from the Frontline. This podcast explores the intersection of philosophy, entrepreneurship, and veteran transition. Join us as we delve into the minds of successful entrepreneurs who have made the journey from military service into small business ownership. Our guests will share their insights, experience, and unique perspectives on life, business, and the world around us. Through deep conversations and thought-provoking discussions, we hope to inspire and empower our listeners to tackle their own challenges and achieve their dreams. So sit back, relax, and get ready to explore the world of entrepreneurship from a veteran's point of view. This is Philosophy from the Frontline, and we'll see you on the high ground. Welcome back, everybody. This is Philosophy from the Frontline. This is episode number 108 with Rand Timmerman. This is going to be a unique experience for me because using a new booking service. So this is the first interview from that booking service. So I'm looking forward to having it. Great background of this gentleman that's joining us on the show today, but has multiple purposes. And I think the first part of it is just, giving the audience an opportunity to see that there is life outside of the military. And that's one of the most difficult things that a lot of veterans are challenged with today is, what am I going to do when I grow up? Sometimes that happens, sometimes that happens during your military career. So you decide to take a different choice or a different path, and then you end up doing something completely different from where you started. And those are always interesting. And so the transition within the transition of the military, but also getting out, taking off the uniform and moving on to bigger and better things. But I'm going to stop yakking at you. I'm going to turn the floor over to Rand and give him an opportunity to kind of tell us your origin story, your background, and how you ended up serving in the military, because you served during a unique period of time in our country's history during the Vietnam conflict. And so that's a distinctly different era of military service than a lot of the folks that we have on this audience that are GWAT vets. But the floor is yours, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Rob. I enlisted in the Marine Corps after a night of debauchery and got drunk in a bar in upstate New York. I grew up in Adams, New York. I was in college at Oswego, the first member of my family to go to college. That area had more cows than people. It was very rural. Old school, hard scrabble families, a lot of poor people. We were very poor. I came from a warrior family. Actually, I had two uncles that served in World War II. One was a belly gunner on B-17, did his 50 missions, and the next crew went down after a week. And I had an uncle that served. He was on D-Day. And then my dad was a Mustang pilot during World War II, and came home, married my mom, and he got polio and he spent a year in a hospital, 8 months in an iron lung, if you could imagine.
Oh, wow. Jeez.
Paralyzed from the neck down, but he ended up being paralyzed from the waist down. And he was he was an old school guy. You deal with it and you cope, and hardworking man. And he ended up being pretty successful, very handy with his hands. But anyway, so I did well in school, but we were very poor, and I hated that. I had a huge resentment against poverty. And I worked very hard and went to college at Oswego, and then I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. I kept changing my major. Finally, I changed the third semester to psychology, Rob, because I knew it was a nut job. I didn't. What you just said, I did not know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I had no clue. I was going to college full time, a janitor from midnight to 8 o'clock in the morning, cleaning toilets at my old high school, pin setter in a bowling alley, and I was selling Amway on the weekends, and I was broke all the time.
Wow.
Yeah. In the meantime, my younger brother Ron, who I hiked the Appalachian Trail with, when he got out of high school, he went into the Army, and so I'm in Oswego, and he's in Vietnam. He ended up being a machine gunner on a helicopter down by Chu Lai. And so the night I got drunk, the bartender came in. I was on the pool table when he came back in the next morning, and he turned the radio on, and they were talking about the 1st Marine Division had just gone into Vietnam, and they were talking about body counts and all that kind of stuff. And for me, it was my version of the French Foreign Legion. And a month later, I was in the War Memorial in Syracuse, New York, raising my hand to pledging to defend my country against enemies, foreign and domestic. And 9 months later, I'm in a rice paddy going, I think I messed up. I might have messed up.
Wow. Yeah, that's very interesting story because again, everybody's service starts a little bit differently. And interestingly enough, people that have a family tradition of serving typically tend to serve. And that's one of the biggest differences that happened coming out of the Vietnam War with the onset of the volunteer military. More people volunteered for service. My grandfather was actually a combat engineer in World War II. My dad served for 27 years in the military as well. So it's kind of like family tradition. Oldest male son kind of joins the military. But the origin story is always different for different people. So I've heard the stories of the people that like, hey, I was on a farm. I had a soldier at one point when I was a basic training company commander, and this dude would eat faster than everybody else. Dude, like, why do you eat so fast? And the reality of it was like, hey, I lived on a farm. I had 7 brothers and sisters. If you didn't eat quick, you didn't eat at all. And so that's part of, that's part of the makeup of who you are, and it kind of transitions you into the military. But
yeah,
so
I would get hungry a lot as a kid. That it's true. It was very true, especially the older you are. I'm 80 now, so looking back on it. But the Marine Corps was really kind of stuck in World War II at that point, as far as all the technology. We didn't, there was no satellites, there's no computers, there's no nothing. We were still operating on old radios. We were eating rations in Vietnam. We were eating rations, sea rats they're all date stamp 44, 45.
wow.
Boxes of ammo, 7.62 ammo, dated 44, 45.
Wow.
The M60 machine gun is right out of the World War II, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's always, we'll dive into the technology. That's kind of the space that I operate now. And that's always been like a trend for Marines, is like, they're always 5 to 10 years behind, or they don't have the most current stuff. And that's typically because, the most current part of the Department of the Navy's budget is going towards, the carriers and the aircraft. And it's not really like, yeah, we got these infantry guys, they're Marines. So what? We'll give them something, they'll still do okay, and I think that develops a sense of resiliency that some branches don't have. And when you see the camaraderie of Marines or former Marines after they leave the uniform, they tend to operate a little bit differently than like your regular Army people or your Air Force folks, just because they suffered through some hardship, just by being in that branch of service. The Marine Corps is no joke. And it's typically reserved for the young folks because they want to keep them young and hungry. And I think sometimes they want them a little bit not so bright, and I think that's just part of the culture, but it's also a necessity given the mission that they have and some of the austerity that they have to deal with. And I think it's, young people typically respond to that kind of adversity better than somebody that's a little bit more mature or used to a little bit more creature comforts.
Right. Yeah, we were all go-getters. I was definitely a go-getter. Marine Corps was about 200,000 manpower at that time in 65, 66. But it exploded to 1 million. People don't realize it exploded to 1 million. And then in the early 70s, well, we had the War One in 68, but then we blew that all off. And the Marine Corps collapsed back down to right today, even I think it's still right around 200,000.
Yeah.
But what it did, Rob, is it created a whole kind of new opportunities for guys like me that were kind of like, I didn't want to just serve. I wanted to serve well, right?
Yeah.
I had that mindset, and I was going to do if I'm burning shitters, I'm going to burn them better than anybody else ever burned them before. And if I'm going to be the machine gunner on a helicopter, which I was, I'm going to be, the best one, that kind of mindset. Not that I was, but I'm just saying, you got that go-getter type attitude. Luckily, I only need about 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night, so I was pretty reliable. And they made me a Mustang lieutenant the last couple of months. Lieutenants did not do well in Vietnam.
Yeah.
The mortality rate was pretty high for them, for sure. But anyway, I lucked out and made it. And then I was getting ready to leave, and I hadn't seen a colonel in months, came looking for me. And I was a corporal. Well, I was a second lieutenant, but I'm going back to corporal.
Yeah.
As soon as I get on that plane to go home, I'm a corporal again. And he came and he looked at me. He said, "Do you have any plans, young man?" I said, "Well, I don't know, sir. I'm just hope I didn't realize until about 2 weeks ago I might actually get out of here alive." So, and he chuckled and said, "Well, if you want to stay a second lieutenant, I can make that happen, but you got to go through OCS. You got to go through officer candidate school and the basic and all that stuff. Or you can just go back and you probably get out because your time's almost up." And I said, "You know what, sir, I'll do that." Because I had no clue, right?
Yeah.
So I did all the officer stuff, and then I decided I didn't want to be a grunt anymore. They call infantrymen grunts in the Marine Corps. So I signed up to go to the Air Wing. And I went down to Cherry Point in South Carolina, and I've checked in there. And the captain, it's Sunday, Rob. This is an unbelievable story. This was my butterfly moment. You ever hear about the butterfly syndrome?
Yeah.
It flaps its wing, and then a few days later, a tornado is created, right?
Yeah.
In other words, something unbelievable happens. And his name was Dale Moen. He was a captain. He was a Mustang captain. He had been my drill instructor in Parris Island.
Oh, wow.
2.5 years before as a staff sergeant. They made him a Mustang lieutenant captain. He actually was a Mustang major for not very long, a few days. And when I left Cherry Point 3 years later, I'm a first lieutenant. He was a gunnery sergeant again.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because they were trying to keep up with the expansion, and then it slowed down, and then it was obviously going to go down the backside. But anyway, so I get there checking in, and we do the hugs and kisses. We don't actually kiss, of course, but glad to see each other and all that. And he is, "Rand, I got a bunch of schools. You want to go to school?" And I go, "I don't know what you got." And he's rattling them off, and he says, "Rhode Island, Newport, Rhode Island." And I looked at him, I said, "Dale, I've never been to Newport, Rhode Island before. What is it?" And he says, "It's a JAG school."
Huh.
A JAG school, which is for legal officers, Judge Advocate General School. So I get over there. Everybody else is a captain. They're all captains. Most of them are Marines. There's some Navy guys. So they're all 03s. I'm a brand spanking new 01, right? And they're looking at me like, "Where the hell did you come from?" Because they've all got a college degree, which I didn't have. They've got their law degree, right? All that good stuff. And 20 of us rented a mansion on the ocean. Each had our own individual, because it was the off season.
Yeah.
So we got a kind of good setup there. And these guys are, they just got done with law school and the bar and all that stuff. And now all the military training, and they want to party. And I decided, you know what? I think I'm going to work at this. And the irony was that when we graduated, I was the honor man platoon of the class.
Wow.
I pissed them all off. But what it did, Rob, was it made me realize I could do this. And I liked the law. I liked the rules. I liked having to do research and trying to help men. And they made me a defense attorney at first. And then I got a couple of acquittals. So they made me a prosecutor. And I'm on the list to go back to Vietnam, which if I had gone back, I probably would have been a forward observer.
Wow.
And then every few months I'd get sent down to Puerto Rico to do articles. There's a Navy base down there. We had a Marine unit.
Yeah.
So Captain Moen, my friend, the ex-drill instructor, I'd get orders, and he usually signed them, and I go down there and I do all the Article 32s and come back, and I go, I'm not at the top of the list to rotate over to Nam again. And then the second time it happened, he just looked at me and said, "You stupid son of a gun. Why do you think I keep sending you down to Puerto Rico?" Because he knew I'd probably get killed if I went back. And so I had a guardian angel in the Marine Corps. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's always interesting when those things happen, and you don't realize who's watching out for you until you have some distance in the rearview mirror, and I had a situation when I was a company commander where we lost 3 soldiers on our first mission. And then like towards the end of the year, one of my NCOs walked up to me and is like God took those guys for a reason. They were our guardian angels, because we went from having 3 casualties at the beginning of the year, had some guys get wounded, but no one got significantly hurt after that. We didn't lose anyone. And so it was one of those things where it's like, wow, like when you take a step back and you think about it, broadly, like, you know, you're being taken care of, and sometimes you just don't realize it.
Yeah.
And you just got to appreciate those moments when they do happen. So we've talked about, the JAG school, talked about how you ended up becoming an officer. Uh, so let's fast forward a little bit, and why did you eventually decide to get out? Was your time up, or did you just find the call to greener pastures? Because I know, like, my generation of military leaders, a lot of guys do 5 and fly, like, hey, I'm going to do that 5 years, and then I'm going to get out and I'm going to go into the corporate environment, and I'm going to make $100,000 a year and live comfortably for a very, very long time. And your generation, again, was clearly different, returning from the war and how things were going. So, did that influence your decision, like your return back from Vietnam, or was it just, some other, calling that kind of led you to transition from the uniform?
Yeah, being a military veteran in the Vietnam War was not fun when it came to your relationship with the public and civilians. We would come off base, we had to wear our uniforms. You couldn't wear your utilities in those days. You had to be in your real uniform. We would always go to the nearest gas station and get it in our civvies, not that nobody would know with our haircuts and all that, but and then when we came back off, base, weekend pass or whatever, we'd go to that same gas station and get out of our civvies and put on our uniforms and then get in the car and drive right onto the base. And when I came back from Vietnam, a guy in LA, damn near got himself killed. Except 4 nurses grabbed the stanchion out of my hands that I was about to send him off to the promised land with, because he kept poking me in the chest, and then he finally pushed me really hard, and something inside me snapped, and the police were taking him away in handcuffs, and the next thing I know, I'm in first class, and then the pilot, captain of the airplane, the commercial airliners, sitting there talking to me, and it turns out he's a Marine Corps aviator veteran from the Korean War.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
If it hadn't been for him, I would have been the one in the handcuffs.
Wow.
Yeah, but those kind of things. And then when it came time, I could have stayed in. I would have made captain. I was like within a few days of captain, but I also knew I could see what was happening with the Marine Corps, and I could have been a captain for 10 years.
Wow.
Because they were way overmanned at that point,
Mm-hmm.
and where the trajectory was for the manpower was going and everything. And I was married, I had a kid at that point, and I knew I wanted to be a lawyer, so it was kind of an easy decision for me to get out. So I got out, went to Syracuse, where I am right now, actually, and went through law school, and I got my BA in 3 years, and then law school. Actually, I got my BA in 2 years, and then law school for 3. I had a great career. I had a little bit of a drinking problem. I was racked with nightmares, bad ones.
Mm-hmm.
I had been a member of a reaction platoon, and we had gone out when things were really bad, and they wanted to try to turn the tide real quick if they could.
Yeah.
And so I had some pretty bad experiences along the way there, but it was funny, Rob, because when I came back, I thought for a while I was all right. I'm in college. I got the family. I'm working 3 jobs again because I don't have any money. The GI Bill didn't even pay my tuition at Syracuse.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was all for me. It was always fighting like hell to just have enough money to live on. And, but when the nightmares came, it was just like, oh my God. And, so I medicated with alcohol, but mostly late at night after I put the kids to bed. It didn't really affect me that much. The nightmares did, but alcohol eventually became a serious problem in my late 60s, or my late 50s, early 60s. And I'm in a recovery program. I have been now for 12 years, and I help men every day. And it really turned my life completely around. But first time I ever went to anything that had to do with the VA was I was 65 years old, and I was in handcuffs, and they took me to a psych ward.
Wow.
Because I was suicidal, because the drinking had just gotten so bad, and I couldn't. I ended up retiring because I didn't want to blow up my career. I had a great career. Nobody knew about my problems.
Yeah.
My family did, but most people didn't have a clue. But that was kind of the transition for a lot of us, when there was no benefits when we transitioned, it was just, you're on your own, kid. There was nothing. And
Yeah.
some of my best friends from the Marine Corps, virtually all of them are gone. And it was either alcohol directly or indirectly.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I think that's, and that's one of the challenges that we still face today, right? I mean, you can talk about the veteran suicide rate, but typically the veteran suicide rate is tied to some other instance that is, usually predicated from their service, and it's very very frustrating because from the outside looking in, watching the previous generation suffer. Like I have a friend of mine, and he went almost a decade without being properly diagnosed through the VA. And he was suffering. Like his family was suffering, he was suffering, and uh, you know, by the grace of God, he's still with us. And he's on a better path now. But it it takes a lot, particularly for like there are differences, and I hate to say that, and you being a former grunt will understand that there's a difference between being an infantryman and being a quartermaster, you know, and some people don't want to hear that, but the truth of the matter is like you see different things, and really your proximity to the target has a lot to do with, the invisible wounds that happen, over time or after your career is over. And it's very, very difficult to isolate those things sometimes. There's like I can remember times I was playing a video game that had, a pretty intense shooting match and it was conflict. And like I literally had a panic attack. And I'm like, this makes absolutely no sense. But then when I stopped and took a moment, stepped back and looked at the bigger picture, I was like, wow, like, okay, I know exactly why that happened. But most of the time we're just not that self-aware, like let's be real, we're going through our lives just, day to day doing things. And you know, finding somebody that can commiserate with you or finding a program, whatever that is, whether that be a veterans group, whether that be a 12-step recovery program, a church, whatever it is. I don't care what it is, right? Do not care. It's kind of like, hey, you do what you need to do to fix yourself. And I say that in the sense, not in a bad way. It's just like that's the way that it is. Like sometimes you have to get help. And the ultimate thing is we just don't want you to have to hit like the worst of rock bottoms. But unfortunately, for most people, that's where it has to go before, we have that big enough shakeup in our lives to be like, okay, hey, I need some help. That's
Right.
external to me.
Yep.
And so that's always interesting. But I think this also transitions into what you're doing now. So like we can see the banner in the back if you're watching the video version of this, and it talks about your book, A Spiritual Passage. And I think that's probably more so what you're doing now. So it seems that you found purpose in retirement in helping people. So could you describe a little bit more about the book and what it's led you to do as far as veteran advocacy and helping people that are struggling?
Sure. When I was struggling with alcohol, I finally did admit I needed help after my little episode there in the VA, and I got a really good sponsor, and he took me through the steps. It's a program for alcoholics who like to remain anonymous. So, and I've been very involved in it. I've helped. It took me a year to go through the 12 steps, which is really kind of fast for a lot. I had a really great sponsor. He's gone now, but not only was he teaching me how to be a sober man, but he was actually teaching me how to help other men get sober. And I tend to get the guys that were veterans, relapsers, because I had a relapse history in the beginning. I really struggled before I finally said, okay, I need help. I can't do this by myself anymore. And because I could get some sobriety for a while, but I could just never stay stopped. And then
Mhm.
as soon as I started drinking, alcoholism is a disease. The alcoholics metabolize alcohol differently. We create an excess of acetone, which gives us that overwhelming, obsessive thirst. And you can be on a 3 or 4 day drunk and you're thirstier than you were when you started, and you don't have no clue. You cannot figure out why I can't stop. And that
Mhm.
was the way it was for me. And so guys who struggle that way tend to relate to me. And I've had And they're also the hardest ways to work. They're the most frustrating. I mean, us vets tend to have pretty big egos, a lot of
Yeah.
pride for good reasons. We've done a lot of good things. We're totally baffled by this whole alcohol thing. We don't understand why we can't. This is the one thing that's kicking our ass, and we just uh, can't ask for help. It's
Yeah.
unbelievable. But I've had a lot of good experiences too with that. So anyway, I was 4 years sober when Ron's wife Edie died and left him with 50 relatives. She had 7 kids, 27 grandkids, and now 30 great grandchildren. When Edie,
Wow.
yeah, so Edie passed and left Ron with this huge family. When he came back from Vietnam, Edie was our mother's best friend, 14 years older than Ron. When they went on the first date, she brought 3 of her 7 kids with her.
Wow.
And Ron fell madly in love, and they ended up getting involved in the Church of Latter-day Saints, better known as Mormons, and they actually moved to Utah.
Hmm.
Lived out in St. George for 40 some years. But Ron and I were both warriors after our military career. He did a lot of hiking and all kinds of stuff. I ran 26 marathons. I was one of those weekend warrior guys, 26 marathons. I did all kinds
Wow.
of races, dragged my kids to races, cross country ski races in the winter. And so when we walked the trail, I was 72, Ronnie was 71, but we were, physically, and we're not big guys either. We're both about 5'8", 175 pounds. But we were pretty well physically. Well, I had an artificial knee and my right leg is a half-inch shorter than my left, so I limp. But other than that, we were pretty stalwart kind of guys and definitely very gritty. And Ronnie decided he was going to hike the Appalachian Trail. When I asked him how he's going to do it, he said he's going to take the bus down to Springer Mountain, Georgia, and start hiking. And I said, the Appalachian Trail is the longest footpath trail in the whole world. It's 2,200 miles from Springer Mountain, Georgia, up into Cahotten Mountain in Maine, which is on the other side of the 100-mile wilderness. And you go over 600 mountains, and you are going up and down almost it's 465,000 feet of elevation changes. So that's like 500,000 feet of up and down, right?
Yeah, it's pretty impressive.
It's unbelievably difficult. About 3 million people hike some part of it every year, but only about 3,000 try to do the whole thing. And of that, 17% or about 450 people actually do it. It is incredibly difficult. I was absolutely convinced we couldn't do it, but I didn't tell him that. When I did the book and he read it the first time, he goes, I had in there in the first couple of pages, 2 weeks max in big bold letters. And he goes, you didn't think we could hike the whole trail? I said, hell no. I figured 2 weeks max, we'd be done. You'd give up. But I should have known better. But no, it was unbelievably hard, difficult, painful in many ways. And it was the best, most spiritual, liberating, being in nature. We talked a lot about the war. We had never talked to each other hardly about anything like that. Veterans don't talk to each other about that stuff. They just don't. My uncles didn't. My dad didn't. Oh, when I came back, Rob, from Vietnam, I had 30 days leave before I went to OCS. I'm going with my dad, who's crippled, right? But we're going out the airport. He's got like a $50 airplane that he bought and fixed up that he wants to show me because he's flying again, despite being paralyzed.
Wow.
And we're going out there, and I started to tell him about one of my misadventures in Vietnam, and he starts yelling at me, no, don't ever talk about it. You don't hear me and your uncle's talking about it. We don't talk about that stuff. It's over. It's done with. Put it in the back of your head in that dark room you can't go into, And I'm kind of like protesting a little bit, and he starts hitting me over the head with a chart, which is a map that pilots use, right? Like I'm 12 years old again. I mean, Jesus Christ, Dad, I'm a combat veteran. Treat me with some respect. Oh God! But I never talked about it again.
And I think that's it's a byproduct of our culture, particularly in the veteran community, and a lot of guys that are closer to the X than others, right? So there's a tendency not to want to talk about it, or the tendency to talk about it is to a very, very, very tight circle of people that either were there with you when it happened or were in very close proximity to you when it happened. And a lot of the times, you know, they're like fish stories. Either they get worse or they get crazier with time. Right. And so if you don't document them, even in the sense of like communicating them to a counselor or a therapist or something like that, then those stories in your mind can get worse, you know? And so I think that's one of the difficulties that a lot of veterans have is they transition out of the uniform. You go from, being in an infantry battalion is like being in a frat house with a bunch of guns and a purpose, right? Right. I mean, it really is, because hey, what are we going to do today? Let's go pick a fight, right? You go out and you go and do an ambush. Like that's life as an infantryman. It's not that hard.
Yeah.
But when you come back and you don't have that outlet for your aggression, or you don't have, those people around you that you can commiserate with, it really changes the whole scope of who you are as a person. And again, I can assure you that you are drastically different from the man that entered into the uniform all those years ago. I'm different. Everybody that joins the military that serves, whether you serve in combat or not, you're a changed person because, the military does a great job of pulling people in that know nothing about the military and turning them into soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, right? You're either physically fit enough to be in the military or you're mentally fit enough in the military. And that's what basic training is for, is to bring you towards the middle so you could do a little bit of both. And you don't truly understand how much camaraderie is in the military until you leave it,
Yeah, I didn't have that. Most of the guys I served with didn't make it.
Oh, wow.
Or the ones that did make it didn't survive very long with and I tried to help a couple of them long before I had a serious drinking problem.
Yeah.
I had no clue, and it was very frustrating, and I finally just kind of put my hands up for a while there. I don't know. But I have a lot of joy in my life today, and it's all because of getting the help I needed first through the recovery program, and then eventually some stuff from the VA with some of the medical stuff. I think the VA does a tremendous job. There's so many things out there today that what my generation never had.
Yeah.
I have a friend he was a career veteran in the Rhodesian Army. He lives in Australia.
Wow.
And he just wrote this book, You Are Not Alone. His name is Barry Swarnstein. I'm giving a little plug in here, Rob.
Oh, that's quite all right.
This book is 900 pages on all about transitioning.
Wow.
And my story is in chapter 33 or whatever the hell it is. It's 900 pages. It's a tome, but I'm involved in that. I got involved in a group. They're out in San Diego, believe it or not. We do all this stuff by Zoom. I joined a veterans writing group a couple of years ago because I was starting to write short stories about some of the shit that happened in Vietnam. And I realized that even though I'm sober, I hiked the Appalachian Trail. I did that book, and I've written some other stories. I finally decided I needed to start writing about some of that stuff that was in that place in the back of my head that you don't want to go into without a shotgun and a flashlight, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And I met a bunch of guys at Syracuse University. It's called the Veterans Writing Workshop, and there's 3 ladies that run it. They're all literature professors, and all of a sudden I'm with guys, and 2 of them are combat Marines from Vietnam. So all of a sudden I had a tribe again. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow. Changed my life.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say find your tribe, because I say that all the time, right? Like you have to have that group of people, that surrounds you, that are going to support you. And sometimes it's family, could be, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that. Or, in the longstanding tradition of, back in the old days, your parents were like, well, your friends are not your family. Family is the people that you choose to keep around you. Right? Like, in my opinion, I think that's really ultimately what it is. And being able to have a positive outlet for those stories. And I can't say that I've written a book personally, but I have, several of my NCOs, and one of the big ones is Sergeant Troutman. He wrote a book about our first deployment, and what he did that was so incredible that I enjoy about his writing was he interviewed as many people from the company as he could to paint the picture as broadly as he could, rather than like, hey, look, I'm telling it from this, this keyhole observation of one individual soldier in the organization. So I'm putting it out there as wide as I can. And the fact that you're writing things is great because, again, we're all not getting any younger. And there are lessons, and there's lessons that need to be learned from the Vietnam era. There's lessons that need to be learned from, military in the 80s and the 90s before GWAT happened, because those experiences, you know, will impact our society. There's so much impact in our society from the military that we just don't typically see. And the biggest thing is just the ability to be free and to communicate openly in our country comes from, those young men and women that are willing to stand a post and guard our freedoms. And
Right.
like, whether you agree or disagree politically, who cares? At the end of the day, like, I've served with some people that, like, all right, that's not the way I see things, but I'm not gonna, I don't care. You're covering my six, right? Like, it matters. It matters because of the situation that you're in. Like, the situation supersedes your personal feelings about it. And I think that's a critical piece of the military. And I think that's a lesson that a lot of our society could learn from, is just like, look, there's people out there that are willing to sacrifice their youth, their body, their mental health for you to live free. And that is something that we should not take for granted. And so I super appreciate your service, but I also appreciate what you're doing now by, capturing those stories and retelling them in a way that makes them accessible to a lot of people. Because, rarely, if ever, will a 17 or 18-year-old kid walk up to a veteran and say, hey, tell me a story. Tell me about, some
No,
experience that you had that shaped your life.
that's very important. And luckily for me, I just did a presentation at a group of mostly college students and professors at Syracuse University that came about because of the Veterans Writing Workshop. And the
Oh,
ladies
wow.
were saying, this guy's got a good story. I wrote a story about Christmas Eve in Vietnam in 1966.
Oh, wow.
Just that one night, I almost shot a lieutenant because I thought he was the enemy, but uh, yeah. So anyway, but it's amazing what you just said, because a lot of those kids are veterans, right?
Yeah.
So not a lot of them, but some of them are veterans, and then they come up to me and they, we can relate because they have no idea what it was like when I went through.
Yeah.
And today, it's totally different, but in many ways, it's the same.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I say this all the time. I used to work at Ranger School years ago. And what I tell people is, like, why Ranger School still teaches raids, recons, and ambushes? Because raids, recons, and ambushes will never change, no matter what generation you're in. Like, if I got to do an ambush is still going to be the same. And so I think there are commonalities across all generations of veterans that we can all, we can bank on and have conversations about. And then there's differences too. And sometimes that's where, the I won't say the money is made, but that's where the conversations really can get interesting, because you can talk about something and learn something new, right? So I can learn something new about an experience that I didn't have. And I'm going to circle back to this because, like, one of the things that you mentioned very, very early in this, and it's a byproduct of the Vietnam era soldiers, right? Is you guys talk about things and you just drop them like it's not important. You're a door gunner on a helicopter in Vietnam, which was a brand new, untested piece of technology, at that time period. Now it's drones and robots, right? So, like, that's like the newfangled shiny toy that the military is using. But back then, helicopters were completely brand new. And so as a door gunner on a helicopter, like, how frightening is that? Because, like, I don't even know if this thing is going to work for the whole mission, let alone, allow me to do my job. But I think that's something that, like, we have to account for, is because, like, all too often the generations previous to us have done things that are so tremendous and so are outside of the lines of the rest of the military that it, like, we don't even acknowledge it. And, like, I'm going to acknowledge it because, like, I really see that, like, wow, like, not a lot of people were doing that. That's certainly not a job that people would volunteer for and end up, hanging off the side of a Huey for months at a time.
Yeah, I actually liked it. It was amazing. It was like being on a roller coaster with a machine gun. I mean, but it was terrifying. And one of the ways they get you to volunteer is they would tell you, well, look, you don't have to worry about it, because they get shot up all the time, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of empty space on a helicopter, but as far as where bullets can go and things like that. But they would say, well, this, if the motor shuts down, the pilot can still rotate the blades and you will spiral down gently to the earth. I can tell you that's not a thing. Okay? That doesn't work.
Yeah.
They always end up going sideways.
Yeah.
And usually everybody gets killed. But anyway, but it was, I don't know.
Yeah, it's just an interesting fact because I know a handful of Vietnam era veterans that are just like, oh yeah, we did this. And you're like, sir, you can't just like toss that out there like it's nothing, because like you being a door gunner on a helicopter is like the first drone pilot to successfully, fly and do an airstrike with that platform, right? Like it's the equivalency of that. And a lot of people just don't realize it because we're so oversaturated with technology that when something new happens in the military, it's kind of like, oh, well, the military has drones. So what? Like, well, no, it's completely different, and it's just an interesting part of the culture.
Yeah.
But
you're absolutely right. We were learning as we went. At first, the plexiglass where the pilots were was underneath their feet, right?
Yeah.
Well, they were getting shot from below. So,
oh, geez.
Right. So we were learning as we went. The next thing I knew, there was like a half-inch steel plate that they put in the Hueys under their feet so that they would deflect those around. So it was kind of like that. We were just learning every day new tricks, how to make something work a little better. But flying around with a machine gun is, oh my God, unbelievable. Scary as hell, for sure.
I don't doubt that.
The adrenaline rush was unbelievable.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that, and we'll wrap with this, and I'll give you an opportunity just to plug everything that you're working on right now. But the last thing that I will say is like, there's something to be said about adaptability. And that's one thing that you don't want to lose from your military service as you transition to the outside. It's just being adaptable, right? Like if you show up to the military, sometimes you're going to play out of position. Well, most times you're probably going to play out of position. Nothing that you learned in school is going to prepare you for your next job, because there's always going to be something crazy that was not in the book that you have to figure out. And, being that way when you leave the uniform is probably one of the single greatest characteristics that you can have as a veteran, is just being mentally and emotionally agile. Like, hey, look, I'm going to give you this problem and I need you to figure it out. And that's transition in a nutshell, because like so many people do it, but it's so unique to each person that your transition is not going to be like, hey, I can't use the cookie cutter stamp, because you're not going to get the answer that you're looking for, right? Like, oh my gosh, like I didn't realize that it was going to be so incredibly crazy, or it was going to be so difficult for me to, find a job or write a resume or whatever. But that inherent resilience that you have from being in the military, all that adversity that you've been exposed to, and that stress inoculation, you can be successful on the outside if you use some of those lessons, maybe not the language, but those lessons that you learned while you were in uniform, and just bring that into your life on the outside of the military. But I'll pause there. One last opportunity to plug whatever books. I know you said You Are Not Alone is one of them. We'll get that in the podcast description. Anything else that you're working on, or any future projects that we need to be aware of that you want to bring attention to?
Yep. Of course, I did the Appalachian Trail book. I have a website, randtimmerman.com. That's just randtimmerman.com. And then if you Google my name or a spiritual passage, you'd be amazed what pops up. I just wrote another book that's just being published right now called Syracuse Hitman versus the Shoe Repairman. It's based on a true story of a guy I knew in my recovery program that was a hitman.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, back in the day, and he ended up turning his whole life around. It's a fantastic story. It's mostly made up, but I got to know him pretty well. He was blind the last few years of his life, and I took him to meetings every weekend.
Wow.
And I heard all his stories. And he had a brother. His name's Tippy. He's in the book too. And he actually was a combat Marine in Vietnam, the real Tippy, and he won the Silver Star. So it's got everything in it. It's got murder, trials. I'm in it. Tim Randall is my the lawyer in the book, and it's a fun book. It's a amazing read, really.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show today. This was great. I enjoyed this conversation. this is the whole reason why we do this, is a platform to have conversations with other veterans, talk about transition, just cool stuff that you're doing. And the other part of it is you make a new friend and you get to learn something new. And there's a whole list of books. I'm gonna put all of them in the podcast description. I'll put all your contact information in there. And yeah, this has been great. I've had a great time. I've enjoyed this. Rand, I appreciate your time today. This has been Philosophy from the Frontline. This is episode number 108 with Rand Timmerman, and we will see you guys on the high ground. Thanks. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Philosophy from the Frontline. We hope today's conversation gave you valuable insights into the journey of veterans transitioning into the world of small business. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. It helps more people find us and supports our mission to empower veteran entrepreneurs. Stay connected with us on social media and visit our website for more resources, tips, and episodes. Remember, your service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. Your next mission is just beginning. Until next time, keep pushing forward, stay resilient, and turn your battle-tested skills into business success. This has been Philosophy from the Frontline, and we'll see you on the high ground. Thanks.